Sarah Mitchell stood before the mirror in her wedding dress, suffocating under the weight of expectation. 200 guests, a perfect fiancé, and a picture-perfect future awaited. Then she saw him, a mysterious stranger in a tailored suit, leaning against an Aston Martin, offering escape. One impulsive decision would unravel not just her perfectly planned life, but a web of deception, decades in the making. Sometimes, running from the altar is just the beginning. Sarah Mitchell stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, her white dress suddenly feeling more like a straitjacket than the dream gown she'd picked out months ago. Through the window, she could hear the gentle murmur of guests arriving at the Sterling Gardens wedding chapel, where in less than an hour she was supposed to marry David Chen, her boyfriend of 3 years. David was everything her parents wanted for her: stable, kind, responsible. He was a pediatrician who volunteered at free clinics on weekends. He remembered her birthday, got along with her friends, and never forgot to call when he said he would. By all accounts, she should have been ecstatic. But as her maid of honor, Jenny, fussed with the train of her dress, Sarah felt her chest tightening. The diamond ring on her finger, a modest but elegant solitaire that David had saved up for months to buy, seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. "I need some air," Sarah announced suddenly, causing Jenny to drop the fabric she was arranging. "What?" "Sarah, the ceremony starts in 45 minutes. We still need to do your final makeup touch-up and—" "Just 5 minutes," Sarah interrupted, already heading for the door. "I just need to clear my head." She hurried down the back stairwell of the chapel, careful to avoid the main entrance where guests were arriving. The garden behind the building was mercifully empty, its carefully manicured roses and topiaries standing as silent witnesses to her panic attack. That's when she saw him. He was leaning against a sleek black Aston Martin, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire wedding. Dark hair swept back from strong features, and even from 20 feet away she could see the intensity in his steel-gray eyes as they locked onto hers. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Sarah knew she should turn around and go back inside. Instead, she found herself walking toward him, drawn like a moth to flame. "You could say that," she replied, stopping a few feet away. "I'm supposed to be getting married in about 40 minutes. "Supposed to be?" He raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's an interesting choice of words for a bride on her wedding day." Sarah started, then stopped. How could she explain the suffocating feeling that had been growing for weeks? The creeping certainty that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life? "Alexander Drake," he said, extending his hand. "And you're Sarah Mitchell. I saw your name on the wedding announcement board inside." His hand was warm, his grip firm but gentle. Sarah felt a jolt of electricity run through her at the contact. "Tell me, Sarah Mitchell," Alexander said, not releasing her hand. "Do you believe in fate?" Before she could answer, the garden door burst open and Jenny's voice rang out. "Sarah, where are you? Your mom is freaking out." "Come with me," Alexander said quietly, opening the car door. "Life's too short for regrets." Sarah knew this was insane. She had a wonderful man waiting for her inside. She had 200 guests, thousands of dollars in deposits, and a lifetime of plans laid out before her. But as she looked into Alexander's eyes, she saw adventure, passion, and possibility. Without a word, she slipped into the passenger seat of the Aston Martin. As they peeled out of the parking lot, Sarah caught a glimpse of Jenny's shocked face in the rearview mirror. Her phone started buzzing immediately. Calls from her mother, David, her bridesmaids. After the 10th call, she turned it off completely. "Where are we going?" she asked, her heart racing with equal parts excitement and terror. "My private plane is waiting at the regional airport," Alexander replied smoothly. "I thought we might start with Paris, unless you have another preference." Sarah's head was spinning. "This is crazy. I don't even know you." "Sometimes the craziest decisions turn out to be the wisest ones," he said, reaching over to take her hand. "Sometimes you have to trust your instincts." As they drove, Alexander told her about himself, or at least what he wanted her to know. He was an international investment banker who had made his fortune in emerging markets. He had homes in London, New York, and Hong Kong. He'd never married because he'd never found someone who could keep up with his lifestyle, until now. It all seemed too good to be true, because of course it was. The first sign should have been how easily he convinced her to transfer her savings to a secure offshore account for their upcoming travels. The second red flag should have been his insistence that she not contact anyone from her old life, just until the dust settles. But Sarah was too caught up in the whirlwind romance to see the warning signs. Alexander whisked her away to Paris, where they stayed in the presidential suite at the Four Seasons George V. He bought her designer clothes to replace her hastily abandoned wedding dress, took her to Michelin-starred restaurants, and made love to her with a passion that made her previous relationships seem pale in comparison. After Paris came Venice, then Monaco, then Dubai. Each destination was more luxurious than the last, each gift more extravagant. When Alexander proposed after just 3 weeks, presenting her with a massive pink diamond ring, Sarah didn't hesitate to say yes. "We'll have a proper wedding," he promised, kissing her neck as they stood on the balcony of their suite in the Burj Al Arab. "Something that will make your first almost wedding look like a backyard barbecue." But first, he explained, they needed to handle some financial arrangements. It was all perfectly normal for people of their soon-to-be shared social status. Joint accounts, power of attorney, some simple paperwork to protect their mutual interests. Sarah signed everything he put in front of her. After all, she trusted him completely. He was her salvation, her fairy tale prince who had rescued her from a life of comfortable mediocrity. It wasn't until they reached Hong Kong that the first crack appeared in Alexander's perfect facade. They were at a rooftop bar in Central when a woman approached their table, her face twisted with fury. "You bastard!" she spat at Alexander. "How dare you show your face here?" Alexander's expression never changed, but Sarah felt his hand tighten on her waist. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly. "I think you have me confused with someone else." The woman laughed bitterly. "Still playing that game, James? Or is it Alexander this time?" She turned to Sarah. "Let me guess. He swept you off your feet, promised you the world, and now he's slowly working his way through your bank accounts?" Security arrived before the woman could say more, escorting her out at Alexander's request. He explained it away easily. A disturbed ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept their breakup. A woman who had tried to extort money from him and was now bitter about her failure. Sarah wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But that night, as Alexander slept beside her in their luxury suite, she opened her laptop and began to search. What she found made her blood run cold. The woman from the bar wasn't the first to accuse Alexander Drake of fraud. Under different names, James Porter, William Sterling, Marcus Blake, he had left a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across 3 continents. Sarah found news articles dating back 5 years, each telling a similar story. Wealthy or upper-middle-class women, whirlwind romances, and devastating financial losses. Her hands trembled as she clicked through police reports and newspaper clippings. The pink diamond ring on her finger, the one she'd been so proud to show off in countless Instagram posts, suddenly felt like it was burning her skin. But Sarah wasn't ready to confront the truth, not yet. She told herself that these women must be lying, that there had to be some explanation. After all, she had seen Alexander's wealth firsthand. She'd flown in his private jet, stayed in the finest hotels, dined at the most exclusive restaurants. What she didn't know was that the jet was chartered with stolen money. The hotel stays were paid for with fraudulent credit cards. The restaurants were chosen specifically because their owners were part of Alexander's vast network of accomplices, all taking their cut of the con. As doubt crept in, Sarah began to notice other inconsistencies. Alexander's phone calls always took place in private. He had an endless supply of business cards with slightly different company names. The investment bankers and business partners they met for drinks never seemed to materialize for actual business meetings. Still, she said nothing. The shame of admitting she had been fooled was too great. She had abandoned her wedding, her family, her entire life for this man. How could she face anyone if it all turned out to be a lie? Then came the first emergency. Alexander's accounts had been temporarily frozen due to a technical banking error. Could she loan him $100,000 just for a few days? He'd pay her back double. Sarah hesitated for the first time since getting into his car that fateful day. It wasn't that she didn't have the money. Her parents had left her a substantial inheritance when they died in a car accident 2 years ago. But something about the request set off alarm bells she could no longer ignore. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll take care of it first thing in the morning." That night, as Alexander slept, Sarah did more than just research. She logged into her bank accounts, horrified to discover that the secure offshore transfers he had convinced her to make had left her with barely a quarter of her original savings. The joint accounts they had opened together showed numerous transfers to shell companies she'd never heard of. She thought of David, the man she'd left at the altar. He had warned her about taking things slowly, about making impulsive decisions. She had dismissed his caution as fear of living life to the fullest. Now she understood it was wisdom, born of experience. As dawn broke over Hong Kong's skyline, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't be another victim in a police report. She wouldn't be another cautionary tale in a newspaper article. But she also wouldn't simply run away. She remembered something her father used to say. The best revenge is serving justice on a cold plate. Her father had been a detective before his death, and she had grown up listening to his stories about complex investigations and carefully laid traps. Sarah began to plan. She would need help, not from the police, not yet, but from people who knew how to play this game, and she knew exactly where to start. The woman from the bar hadn't been difficult to track down. Her name was Claire Wong, and she worked as a financial investigator for one of Hong Kong's largest banks. When Sarah walked into her office 2 days later, Claire's expression shifted from surprise to understanding to determination. "So," Claire said, closing her office door, "you finally figured it out." "I need your help," Sarah replied. "Not to get my money back. I know that's probably gone, but to stop him from doing this to anyone else." Claire leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah carefully. "What makes you different from his other victims? Why should I risk getting involved?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Claire a series of photos she'd secretly taken. Documents, bank statements, meeting locations. But more importantly, she showed her something else. A pattern she'd discovered in Alexander's operations. A weakness in his carefully constructed facade. "He's not working alone," Sarah explained. "There's a network, and I think I've figured out how it connects. But I need someone who knows the financial system better than I do." A slow smile spread across Claire's face. "Well," she said, reaching for her phone, "I think it's time you met some other people who'd love to see Alexander Drake, or whatever his real name is, face justice." What neither woman knew was that at that very moment, Alexander was making a discovery of his own. Sarah's laptop had left a trail of her research in the browser history, and his own network of informants had spotted her entering Claire's office building. The game was about to become far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Claire's network turned out to be extensive, 5 other women from different countries, each with their own piece of the puzzle. There was Maria from Spain, whose family's shipping company had been infiltrated by Alexander's associates. Jasmine from Singapore, whose investment firm had traced suspicious transactions linked to his aliases. Rebecca from Australia, who had nearly married him under the name William Sterling and now worked as a private investigator specializing in financial fraud. They connected via encrypted messaging apps, sharing information, and building a comprehensive picture of Alexander's operation. It wasn't just about romance scams anymore. They uncovered links to money laundering, corporate espionage, and even art theft. Sarah threw herself into the investigation, partly to avoid dealing with the shame and heartbreak that threatened to overwhelm her. She began keeping a detailed diary of Alexander's daily routines, his phone calls, his meetings. She noted every inconsistency, every slip in his perfect facade. Meanwhile, Alexander was growing suspicious. Sarah's newfound interest in his business dealings, her careful questions about his associates, it all set off warning bells in his practiced conman's instincts. But rather than confront her directly, he decided to accelerate his plans. "Darling," he announced one evening as they dined in their hotel suite, "I think it's time we move forward with the wedding plans. I've found the perfect venue in Switzerland, very exclusive, very private." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Switzerland? I thought we were staying in Hong Kong for another month at least." "Plans change," he said smoothly, refilling her wine glass. "Besides, I have some business opportunities there that I'd like to explore. Speaking of which," he pulled out a stack of papers. "We should update our financial arrangements before we leave, just some routine adjustments to our joint accounts." Sarah recognized the predatory gleam in his eyes now, the same look he'd had when he'd first convinced her to transfer her savings. "Of course," she said, taking another sip of wine. "Whatever you think is best." That night, after Alexander had fallen asleep, Sarah sent an urgent message to Claire and the others. The move to Switzerland would disrupt their careful surveillance and investigation. They needed to act faster. But Alexander's network was already moving. Sarah didn't know that her encrypted messages were being monitored, that her careful notes were being photographed while she was in the shower, that her every move was being tracked by the very people she thought she was investigating. The next morning, Sarah woke up alone. A note on the pillow said Alexander had an early business meeting. She immediately checked her phone, but the encrypted messaging app wouldn't open. When she tried to log into her email, the password had been changed. Panic rising, she called Claire's office number. The line was disconnected. Sarah rushed to dress, her hands shaking as she threw on clothes. She needed to get to Claire's office to warn the others. But when she opened the hotel room door, she found two large men in suits waiting outside. "Ms. Mitchell," one of them said with a cold smile, "Mr. Drake requests your presence at a meeting." Sarah's mind raced. She could scream, but in a hotel this exclusive, the security would likely be part of Alexander's network. She could try to run, but where? She didn't even know who she could trust anymore. Then she remembered something her father had taught her about undercover work. Sometimes the best way to gather evidence was to let the criminals think they had won. "Of course," she said, smoothing her dress. "Lead the way." The men escorted her to a waiting car. As they drove through Hong Kong's bustling streets, Sarah's hand crept to her necklace, a gift from Alexander that she'd never taken off. Inside the pendant was a tiny USB drive containing everything she'd discovered about his operation, including account numbers, contact lists, and surveillance photos. What Alexander didn't know was that the drive was also broadcasting its location to a secure server maintained by Rebecca's investigation firm. It had been Claire's idea. "Hide in plain sight," she'd said. The car pulled up to a sleek office building in the financial district. As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Sarah took deep breaths, steadying herself. Whatever was waiting for her behind those doors, she needed to stay calm and alert. The elevator opened directly into a massive penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Victoria Harbor. But Sarah's attention was fixed on the group of people gathered around a large conference table. Alexander sat at the head, his usual charming smile replaced by something harder, colder. Next to him was Claire Wong, looking perfectly composed in a designer suit. "Sarah, darling," Alexander said, standing to greet her, "I believe it's time we had a very honest conversation about trust, don't you? What happened next would change everything, not just for Sarah, but for everyone involved in this dangerous game of deception and revenge." Sarah's blood ran cold as she scanned the room. Along with Claire, she recognized Maria and Jasmine seated at the table, both wearing the same composed expressions. Her mind struggled to process the betrayal unfolding before her. "Please sit," Alexander gestured to an empty chair. "I must say, you've impressed me. Most marks don't dig nearly as deep as you did." "Marks?" Sarah's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Is that what you call the women whose lives you destroy?" Alexander laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "Destroy? My dear, I create opportunities. Ask Claire." Claire leaned forward, her professional demeanor unchanged. "The thing about con artists, Sarah, is that the best ones don't work alone. They work with other professionals who understand the long game." "You were all in on it," Sarah said slowly. "From the beginning, the confrontation at the bar." "A classic hook," Jasmine confirmed. "Nothing draws someone in like thinking they've discovered a secret." Sarah's mind raced back through every interaction, every seemingly chance encounter, every piece of evidence she thought she'd cleverly uncovered. It had all been orchestrated, breadcrumbs leading her exactly where they wanted her to go. "But why?" she asked. "Why such an elaborate scheme?" "Because," Alexander replied, sliding a folder across the table, "your inheritance was never the real target. Your father's encrypted files were." Sarah's breath caught. Her father, the detective, had died in what she'd always believed was a car accident. But before his death, he'd been working on a major international case. "We knew he'd hidden his evidence somewhere," Maria explained, "but we could never crack his security protocols. Then we discovered everything had been transferred to you, his only heir. We just needed you to trust us enough to give us access." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her necklace, the USB drive that she thought contained evidence against Alexander. Had that been compromised too? Don't worry about the necklace, Alexander said, noting her movement. That little broadcast beacon was our idea. Very useful for tracking your movements. Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities. She was trapped in a room with professional con artists who had orchestrated her every move for months. But they didn't know everything. They couldn't. So now what? She asked, buying time. You kill me like you killed my father? Alexander's expression flickered, the first genuine reaction she'd seen. Your father's death was unfortunate but necessary. He got too close. You, on the other hand, have a choice. He pushed another folder toward her. Join us. You've proven you have the instincts for this work. Think about it. No more playing by society's rules, no more settling for a safe, boring life with someone like David. You could be part of something bigger. Sarah picked up the folder, appearing to consider it. Her father had taught her another lesson. Sometimes the best way to fight wasn't with fists or guns, but with information. And there was one piece of information they didn't have. What makes you think, she said carefully, that I wasn't playing you too? Before anyone could react, the penthouse doors burst open. But what happened next would reshape everything they thought they knew about who was conning whom. David Chen strode into the penthouse, flanked by Interpol agents and Hong Kong police officers. Behind him was Rebecca, the Australian investigator Sarah had supposedly just met through Claire's network. Actually, Rebecca announced, flashing her Interpol badge, we've been tracking this operation for 3 years. Sarah's father was my partner. The look of genuine shock on Alexander's face was almost worth everything Sarah had endured. Claire and the others were already raising their hands as officers moved to secure the room. You see, Sarah said, standing slowly, my father knew he was getting close to something big. He knew they were watching him. So he set up a contingency plan. She reached for her necklace, but instead of removing the USB drive, she pressed a hidden catch that released a different compartment. The real files were never digitized. He left me a key and coordinates. Rebecca found me the day after my parents died, explained everything. The wedding, Alexander said, realization dawning. It was staged. Not entirely, David spoke up, moving to stand beside Sarah. We really were engaged, but when Rebecca told us they were watching Sarah, waiting for an opportunity, we knew we had to give them one they couldn't resist. Sarah looked at the man she'd left at the altar, or appeared to leave. In reality, David had been one of the few people who knew the truth. A doctor with a spotless reputation and no apparent connection to international law enforcement had been the perfect cover. The only way to infiltrate your organization was to make Sarah appear vulnerable, Rebecca explained. A jilted bride, running from a safe but boring life, you couldn't resist. Your psychological profile suggested you'd personally handle such a promising mark. The other women you scammed, Sarah added, the ones whose stories I found online, they were real, weren't they? That's why you believed I'd found genuine evidence against you. You never suspected those articles were planted. Alexander's composed facade finally cracked. The inheritance, he said. We verified it. The accounts were very real, Rebecca confirmed. We needed you to believe Sarah was worth pursuing. The money was there, but so was our surveillance equipment, tracking every transaction you tried to make. Sarah turned to Claire, Jasmine, and Maria, who were now in handcuffs. I'm curious, how many other women have you helped him destroy? How many lives have you ruined for a percentage of the take? None of them would meet her eyes. In the end, they were cowards, willing to prey on innocent people, but unable to face the consequences. Sarah, Alexander said, his voice taking on the smooth, seductive tone she'd once found so irresistible. Surely we can... Save it, she cut him off. I've spent months listening to your lies. I think it's your turn to do some talking, to a judge. As the suspects were led away, David touched Sarah's arm gently. Are you okay? She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this operation began. He had risked everything, put his career and reputation on the line, to help her complete her father's last case. That was real love, not the artificial whirlwind Alexander had offered. I will be, she said softly. But David, what happened between us during all of this? But before she could finish, an agent rushed into the room with news that would throw everything into chaos once again. The network they had uncovered went deeper than anyone had imagined, and Sarah's role in this drama was far from over. We found something in the penthouse vault, the agent reported breathlessly. files linking Alexander's organization to a dozen shell corporations inside the Chinese government. Rebecca swore under her breath. This just became an international incident. Sarah, David, you both need to get to a safe house immediately. What about the suspects? Sarah asked, watching as Alexander and his accomplices were escorted toward the elevator. They'll be moved to a secure facility, Rebecca replied. But if these files implicate who I think they do... The lights in the penthouse suddenly went dark. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the building. "Nobody move!" Rebecca shouted, drawing her weapon. But in the chaos that followed, it became clear that someone had been prepared for this possibility. Smoke filled the room as the sprinkler system activated. Sarah felt David's hand grip hers tightly, pulling her toward what she hoped was the exit. Through the haze, she caught glimpses of figures moving with military precision. These weren't police or Interpol agents. Down! David yanked her behind an overturned conference table as gunfire erupted across the room. Sarah's heart pounded as she remembered her father's final words to her before the accident that claimed his life. Trust no one completely except the person who risks everything for you without asking anything in return. At the time, she thought he'd been talking about love. Now she wondered if he'd been trying to tell her something else entirely. "The necklace," she whispered to David. "The real one, my father's key." David's eyes widened in understanding. When they'd orchestrated the fake wedding and her subsequent running away with Alexander, they'd switched Sarah's actual necklace, the one containing her father's key, with the decoy that held the tracking device. "Where is it?" he asked urgently. "Safe," she assured him. "But I'm starting to think that what it unlocks isn't just case files. My father was investigating corruption at the highest levels. What if..." Her words were cut off by another explosion, this one closer. Through the smoke, she saw Alexander being hustled toward a service exit by figures in black tactical gear. But something was wrong with this picture. He wasn't being evacuated as a prisoner. "He's being extracted," Rebecca's voice came from somewhere to their left. "This whole thing, us catching him, the files in the vault, it was all staged." Sarah's mind raced. If Alexander had allowed himself to be caught, if he had wanted them to find those files... "We're being played," she realized. "All of us. This isn't about my father's investigation anymore. We're all pieces in a much bigger game." David pulled her closer as more gunfire peppered their position. "What do we do?" Sarah thought about the choice in front of her. She could stay and help Interpol try to contain this situation, knowing it might cost her life. Or she could run, not out of impulse this time, but with purpose. She made her decision. "Rebecca," she called out, "cover us. David, when I say run, head for the emergency stairs. Don't stop, don't look back." "What are you planning?" he asked, recognizing the determination in her voice. "My father died trying to expose something massive," she replied. "I'm going to finish what he started, but this time, we do it my way." As she prepared to make her move, Sarah realized that her impulsive decision to run away from her wedding had set in motion events that would impact far more than just her own life. The real question was, who was really pulling the strings? The answer would take her deeper into a world of international intrigue than she'd ever imagined possible. Sarah and David burst through the emergency exit door, the sounds of chaos muffled behind them. As they raced down the stairs, Sarah's mind pieced together the puzzle her father had left her. "The key," she gasped between breaths. "It's not for a safety deposit box or a storage unit. The coordinates he left, they're for a server farm in McCall." "How do you know?" David asked, checking behind them for pursuers. "Because I remember him taking me there when I was young. He said it was a business trip, but now I realize he was setting up a failsafe. He knew someday I might need it." They reached the ground floor, pushing through into an alley behind the building. The sound of sirens filled the air, but Sarah knew the local police would be kept busy with the terrorist incident, undoubtedly being reported upstairs. "We need transportation," David said, scanning the street. "Something they won't expect." Sarah grabbed his arm. "I know where to go. When Alexander first brought me to Hong Kong, he introduced me to a man named Jimmy Chen, no relation to you. He maintains a fleet of luxury cars for wealthy clients." "And you think he'll help us?" "Jimmy has his own reasons to hate Alexander. He lost his sister to one of their scams 5 years ago." They moved through the back streets of Hong Kong, avoiding main roads and surveillance cameras. Sarah had spent months studying the city's layout while pretending to shop and sightsee. Now that knowledge was keeping them alive. Jimmy's garage was exactly where she remembered, tucked away in an industrial area. The older man recognized her immediately, his eyes widening at her disheveled appearance. "Miss Sarah? What?" "Jimmy, Alexander's true identity has been exposed, but he's being protected by powerful people. We need to get to McCall. Now." The mechanic's expression hardened at the mention of Alexander. Without a word, he led them to a nondescript delivery van. "Electric hybrid," he explained, handing Sarah the keys. "Silent running, clean plates, and the cargo area has been modified with emergency supplies and a hidden compartment. I've been waiting 3 years to help take that bastard down." As they drove toward the McCall-Hong Kong bridge, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Rebecca. "Be careful. Alexander isn't the mastermind. He's just another asset. Watch for the woman in red." "Woman in red?" David asked, reading over her shoulder. Sarah's blood ran cold as another memory surfaced. A woman in a red dress at her parents' funeral, offering condolences. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now... "David," she said slowly, "I don't think my father's death was just about silencing his investigation. I think they wanted him out of the way so they could get to me. They needed someone with my specific background." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Daughter of a detective, trained in computer science with access to high-level banking systems through my job. They didn't just groom me as a mark, they were grooming me as a recruit." David's expression darkened. "For what?" Before Sarah could answer, a black SUV swerved into their lane, forcing them toward the bridge's guardrail. In the passenger seat sat Claire, her Interpol captors nowhere to be seen. But it was the driver who made Sarah's heart stop, an elegant woman in a red dress, the same one from her parents' funeral. As their vehicles scraped against each other at high speed, Sarah realized this wasn't just about money or power anymore. This was about something much more personal. The woman in red was Sarah's Aunt Catherine, her father's sister, who had disappeared 20 years ago after a falling out with the family. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow as she fought to keep control of the van. "Hold on!" she shouted to David, yanking the wheel hard to the left. The van's modified suspension system, courtesy of Jimmy's foresight, kept them stable as they swerved away from the guardrail. "Your aunt?" David's knuckles were white as he gripped the dashboard. "The one your father said died in Indonesia?" "Apparently not," Sarah replied through gritted teeth. "And now I'm starting to understand why he lied." The SUV pulled alongside them again. Through the tinted windows, Sarah caught a glimpse of Catherine's face, older than in her childhood memories, but wearing the same calculating expression she remembered from family gatherings long ago. "She was always jealous of my father's position in federal law enforcement," Sarah explained, accelerating to prevent the SUV from cutting them off. "She wanted to be the star of the family, but they picked him for the advanced program instead of her." "So she switched sides?" David asked incredulously. "More than that," Sarah realized. "She built her own side. Alexander, Claire, all of them. They're just pieces on her board. She's been playing this game for decades." The bridge stretched ahead of them, the Macau skyline shimmering in the distance. Sarah knew they'd never make it across. There would be roadblocks waiting, if not worse. "New plant," she announced, spotting an access road that led to the bridge's maintenance level. "Dad didn't just leave that server farm as a backup. He left it as a trap." David looked at her sharply. "What kind of trap?" "The kind that can only be sprung by someone with both the key and the right DNA sequence, a combination of his and mine. He knew Catherine might try to force me to access it someday. He also knew I'd figure out what really happened to him." Sarah swung the van onto the maintenance road, scraping against the barrier, but making it through. The SUV was too wide to follow, but she could see Catherine's vehicle continuing toward the main bridge exit. They'd try to cut them off at the other end. "Jimmy didn't just modify this van for storage," Sarah continued, pressing a button under the dashboard. The rear cargo area hummed as hidden panels opened. "He knew exactly who I was running from. Look in the back. There should be diving gear." David twisted in his seat. "You want to go into the water? At night?" "Under it, actually," Sarah corrected him. "There's a maintenance tunnel that runs parallel to the bridge. Dad used to joke about it at dinner. Except now I realize he wasn't joking. He was leaving me breadcrumbs." They pulled into a maintenance alcove, hidden from the main bridge by concrete pillars. As they quickly donned the diving gear, Sarah's phone buzzed one final time. The message was from Rebecca. Catherine has corrupted half of Interpol's Hong Kong division. Don't trust any official channels. Whatever your father hid, it's big enough to bring down governments. Be careful who you show it to. Sarah stared at the message, remembering all the times her father had tested her, trained her, prepared her for something she hadn't understood until now. He'd known this day would come. "David," she said quietly, "what I'm about to show you, there's no going back. You could still walk away. Get on a plane, go back to your practice, live a normal life." He took her hand, his expression resolute. "I didn't spend months pretending to be heartbroken at the altar just to abandon you now. Whatever this is, we face it together." As they prepared to enter the dark waters, Sarah heard vehicles screeching to a halt above them. They were out of time. But unbeknownst to Catherine, they were also exactly where they needed to be, because the real secret wasn't in the server farm at all. It was in what lay beneath these waters, waiting to be unlocked. The maintenance tunnel led them to an underwater bunker, a relic from World War II that Sarah's father had converted into a secure facility. As they surfaced in an airlock chamber, Sarah's necklace key fit perfectly into a hidden panel. "Welcome, Sarah Mitchell," a computerized voice announced. "DNA confirmation required." After a quick blood sample analysis, reinforced doors opened to reveal a command center filled with servers and monitoring equipment. On the main screen, data began flowing. Decades of intelligence gathering, corrupt officials, secret accounts, and at the center of it all, Catherine's organization. She wasn't just running cons, Sarah breathed, scanning the information. She was building a shadow network inside global financial institutions. The romance scams, the fraud, it was all just a cover for something bigger. "Look at this," David pointed to a file. "Your father wasn't killed because he got too close. He sacrificed himself to protect you. Catherine needed both his DNA and yours to access this facility. If he was alive, she would have taken us both," Sarah finished. "He died to give me time to grow up, to learn, to be ready." Above them, they could hear the thrum of underwater vehicles. Catherine had found them. But Sarah's father had planned for this too. "System purge initiated," the computer announced. "Data transfer commencing." "Transfer? To where?" David asked. Sarah smiled grimly. "Everywhere. Every major news outlet, law enforcement agency, and financial regulator in the world. Dad built a dead man's switch. The moment Catherine's people try to breach this facility, all of her secrets go public." Through the facility's cameras, they watched as Catherine's dive team approached. Then suddenly, the underwater vehicles reversed course. Sarah's phone lit up with a final message from Rebecca. "Catherine's running. Intelligence agencies worldwide are moving on her network. It's over." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in a small chapel, wearing a simple white dress. David waited at the altar, this time knowing she wouldn't run. Rebecca, now a trusted friend, sat in the front row alongside Jimmy Chen. The headlines had finally begun to die down. Global financial conspiracy exposed, shadow banking network dismantled, dozens of officials arrested in worldwide sting. Catherine was still at large, but her power was broken. The organization she'd spent decades building had crumbled in a matter of days. As Sarah walked down the aisle, she touched her new necklace, a simple gold chain, no hidden compartments or secret keys. She'd learned that real love wasn't about grand gestures or whirlwind romances. It was about trust, sacrifice, and standing together against whatever life threw at you. "Ready?" David whispered as she reached him. Sarah took his hand, thinking of all they'd been through. Her impulsive decision to run from their first wedding had nearly destroyed her life, but it had also led her to uncover the truth about her father's death, dismantle a criminal empire, and discover what real love looked like. "I've never been more ready," she replied. And this time, when the minister asked if anyone objected to their union, the chapel remained blissfully, perfectly silent.